Welcome back to Train Signal's Citrix XenApp training. You're watching XenApp 4.5 and 5.0 walkthrough. Alright, so I put this lesson together because I realize and I recognize in my day-to-day job that XenApp 4, or Presentation Server 4 as it was called back then, even Presentation Server 4.5, and to a larger extent XenApp 5, is still very much in production at a lot of shops. So odds are, if you're about to walk into a job that has a Citrix farm, you're going to see either a XenApp 4, 4.5, 5.0 farm, or a reminiscence of these farms in the environment. And one of the things and one of the tasks that you're going to try to have to do in your new position is either to maintain both environments or even to migrate from 4 to 4.5, 5 to 6, etc., or any combination within. So in recognition of that, what I wanted to do in this lesson is, now that we've poured the entire foundation, now that you've become this expert at XenApp 6, I wanted to give you a walkthrough of what the management consoles of 4.5 and 5.0 look like, so that if you're faced with the obstacle of managing, or the challenge of managing two farms at the same time, or tasked with maintaining a farm while you're migrating resources to your new farm, at least you know what it looks like, where certain things are, and how things were in the older versions. So this is going to be a relatively short lesson. What we're going to do is I'm going to take you through a walkthrough of the Delivery Services console on XenApp 5 running on Windows Server 2003. We're going to take a look at where the farm settings were as opposed to where they are today, which is in policies, and we've been talking about that all along. The Administrators tab or node is still in the Delivery Services console. We'll talk about that as well. The Applications node, that's also in the Delivery Services console, and the server settings, so you can configure your servers from the Delivery Services console. Now, conversely, there is a second administration console that exists with earlier version. Anything prior to XenApp 6, there used to be two administration consoles where you could do certain things in the Delivery Services console and some other things in the Advanced Configuration console. And my friend, the Advanced Configuration console has had its name changed numerous times over the course of the life of Metaframe and Presentation Server and XenApp. It used to be known as the Citrix Management Console, or the CMC for those of you that remember. Now in the CMC, or now the Advanced Configuration console, you were able to configure certain things like the load evaluators, the Citrix policies, printer management was done in there, zones, etc., etc. Now the other thing that you don't see with XenApp 6 that we used to see with earlier versions is the ICA administration toolbar. This is the toolbar that always showed up on the right, and I'm going to show you how that exists or where that exists. It always showed up in earlier versions, and it was just quick links or quick shortcuts to certain applications that existed and that's no longer available with XenApp 6. So let's go ahead and jump into our XenApp 5 farm and take a look at where things used to be. So the first thing you'll notice when you log on to a XenApp 4 or 4.5 or 5.0 and even Metaframe XP server is the ICA administration toolbar. This is, again, almost an iconic view or an iconic toolbar that's been around forever. Some of us liked it, some of us hated it. I personally don't like the ICA toolbar, and the first thing I always did was just right click and did an exit. Now what you had within the ICA toolbar here is just quick access to certain applications that are used frequently, like the Access Management Console or the Citrix Management Console, etc., etc. So you had quick access to it. I personally found it annoying and always tried to exit out and said yes, so it doesn't prompt me again. But that's a matter of preference. Some people actually liked it a lot. Now, once you're in your server, you will typically start off by going into your management console, and let's take a look here. So the first thing you'll see is the administrative tools here. Most of them are still there with the exception of the ICA toolbar. We still have the ICA client printer configuration. We still have SSL relay. We've talked about that as well. So you have a bunch of tools here that are available to you within Presentation Server and XenApp that some of them have still ported to XenApp 6, some of them are gone. But the most important change in XenApp 6 is Citrix had finally consolidated its management consoles into a single management console. Took out all the pieces that it didn't want to handle per se and moved those, integrated them with Windows, whether it's group policy or printers, etc., etc., and the rest it consolidated into a single management console. And that's been a process. I mean, that's been a long time in the making, because with the introduction of MetaFrame XP and the Citrix management console, and then they started taking stuff out of the management console into the Access management console at some point, which then became the Delivery Services console. It was really a long time to port all of these different plugins that went into the Delivery Services console today. So the first thing we're going to take a look at in the management console, we're going to go into the Delivery Services console here. Now, again, for those of you that are wondering, depending on the version of XenApp or presentation server that you see, this might be called the Delivery Services console, or it might be called the Access Management console. For the most part, it looks and feels exactly the same. So there's nothing extremely different about it here. Now, when you compare this with what we were seeing in XenApp 6, to contrast just a little bit, you'll notice that this is made up of sort of 3 columns. The middle column here is missing completely in XenApp 6, and this just basically gave you access to quick shortcuts depending on what you have highlighted on the left. In the left node, this would give you quick access to these shortcuts, and you would see the contents in here. So if you expand the farm, you'll notice I've named this one NCOM 5, which stands for NCOM XenApp 5, so to speak, and instead of NCOM, which was our production one for 6. If we expand it, you have your administrators node here, so you can add your administrators, same type of scenario, same approach, even the screens look the same, so nothing has changed here. Within applications as well, if you click on new and you try to publish an application, the wizard's going to look almost identical to what you see with XenApp 6. Very, very minor cosmetic changes for that matter. Servers, again, you'll see you have access to the servers. My server is called DC1. And this is a little confusing or misleading. While you can take a look at the zones, there's really nothing you can do to manipulate zones from the Delivery Services console. That's actually a function of the Advanced Configuration console. I'll show you in a second how to do that. So that's basically what you were able to do with the Delivery Services console here. So let's take a look at certain things. So the first thing I want to take a look at is if you right-click the farm, NCOM 5 here, and drag down to Properties, you'll notice that you have access to a whole slew of things that, for the most part, all of this stuff in XenApp 6 has been moved into policies. And I'm sure you recognize some of these, and we've talked about them extensively in the Citrix policies lesson. But all of these have been moved into policies with the exception of the configuration logging, which shows up under XenApp 6 in the farm settings. But other than that, with XenApp 6, you have nothing you can configure over here, whereas in earlier versions, for example, you can tweak the memory, you can configure HDX stuff, your virtual IPs are here, your server defaults are here, your licensing, your keep alives are in here, so you could change keep alives, etc. I mean, there's a whole slew of things that you can manage from a farm perspective. Your licensing is in here, for example. If you take a look at up here, there you go, you'll see that you have access to the license. So if we click on cancel, and in contrast, let's take a look at servers here. If I click on DC1, again, you'll see I have access to a lot of quick links here. So once you have the server highlighted, if you wanted to change the server edition, it's a little easier, to be honest with you, with XenApp 4, 5, and 5 than it is with 6. It's just, click on it basically, and you come in here and select the edition that you want. Now, conversely, how often are you going to change the edition? And if you're setting it in the policies correctly the first time, then technically you should never come in and do it manually. But there are certain things that you can change here. You have access to the modify server properties. There's a significant amount of properties that you can modify here, as opposed to everything was policy based with XenApp 6. So if we go into modify all properties, you'll notice that all of these properties were later moved into the computer's policy within Citrix policies in XenApp 6, but you still have access to them by right-clicking, going to properties on each particular server with earlier versions of XenApp. Again, here you could take a look at the printer keep alives, bandwidth, etc., etc. Most of these are overridden with the farm policies. But again, this is how you would be able to manipulate or take a look at some of the server settings that you have access to in here. All right, let's go ahead and cancel out of here. That's really all there is to it from a delivery services console perspective. Again, you have access to a lot of different information that you have here. Tabbing wasn't very popular with the delivery services console in earlier versions, but again, you can see how very, very similar they are, and you could probably figure out almost anywhere you want it to get to by just selecting certain things. Keep attention or pay attention that the middle column here gives you access to quick tasks, and then the console or the pane on the right basically displays information. So if we were to minimize this now and go back into Programs, Citrix, and this time if we go into the XenApp Advanced Configuration Console, it prompts you to log in. You have to be a farm administrator, of course, in order to gain access to this. This used to be the old Citrix Management Console, or the CMC. Now, you can easily tell that, hey, there's something wrong here. Both consoles are showing very similar nodes to each other. Well, that's because, again, like I said in the introduction, porting these plugins from one console to another hasn't been completely seamless and hasn't been completely clean. So you can see here you have access to the servers again, but there's really nothing you can do with servers. It'll automatically tell you, hey, if you wanted to configure anything as it relates to servers, launch the delivery services console. Same thing for if you're trying to do anything with the farm here. If you right click it and go down to properties, the only thing that you can manage within the farm properties here are the zones. You'll see that everything else has been moved. It actually tells you it's moved. Launch the console if you wanted to get access to it. But in earlier days, it used to be all the properties you saw in the delivery services console on the left used to be in the Citrix management console on the left here as well. Now the only thing that's left in here is zones configuration. So again, you can very easily modify zone properties here. You can specify whether or not you want the zone data collector to enumerate program neighborhood applications, share load information across zones, etc., etc. If you wanted to set the election preferences for this particular server from a data collector standpoint, you can do that. You can add a new zone if you wanted to, etc., etc. Move servers between zones just simply by dragging and dropping them. So this is the only thing you can see under the farm administration. You can see it's a little tricky to have the zones node hidden here. I mean, there's literally no way for you to figure out that it was under here unless someone's shown you, or if you've been familiar with the XenApp or presentation server or over the years. So if I click on cancel now, load evaluators is also managed in here. So if you click on load evaluators, you see you have your advanced load evaluator and the default load evaluator. Again, by default, you get both of them. You have your usage reports, which we also have in XenApp 6. Then you have your log. Now you'll see that the delivery services console in XenApp 6 is kind of a mixture between the advanced configuration console and the delivery services console. So they've taken the best of both worlds and merged them. So the concept of tabs was with the delivery services console, and they got rid of the middle column, which means they've taken sort of the best of both worlds and morphed them into one another. But if we go back to contents here, it's very easy to create another load evaluator. You can just right click on it and come down here to new load evaluator, and this is what it looked like in previous versions. So you can just click on add from a CPU utilization perspective and modify the values of no load and maximum full load, etc., etc. So you can just pick whatever you want, move it to the right, and that was it. Give it a name, give it a description, and bada bing bada boom, you're done. Now from a Citrix policies perspective, it's also been moved in here, and let me show you what it looked like. So if you created a new Citrix policy, and let's name this one Income 5, for example. Now, you can optimize a certain policy for a connection type. So if you selected this checkbox, you can say, I'm optimizing this particular Citrix policy for the WAN, for satellite, for dial-up, etc., etc. And then you can click on OK. It would create it. And then what you would do is you would right-click on it, drag down to properties, and voila, these are all your settings are in here, and you'd be able to enable or disable certain functions or certain aspects of it depending on what you are trying to do. So you have your workspace control, you have shadowing, you have access to a lot of things in here. Again, we've gone through all of these particular policies earlier, so those are the exact same ones. You're just trying to get through them again, depending on what you're trying to do, etc., etc. Now, once you're done and the policy is the way you like it, the way to filter, again, is basically to drag down, right-click, drag down to where it says apply this policy to, and then you have all of the options here. Again, you see the access control. The screen almost looks exactly the same. You can do it via client IP address range, client name. So all of those have been ported, servers, users, all of those have been ported to XenApp 6, so you can see how easily it is for you to figure them out if you had to with earlier versions. And the last thing I want to talk about here is the printer management. Now with printer management, it's a little interesting because if you remember when we talked about printing with XenApp 6, I told you that with earlier versions you had the ability to do all the auto replication through the GUI, whereas with XenApp 6 it's all PowerShell based, etc. So with XenApp's with all the earlier version, you had the ability to import a network print server. So if you came here and you wanted to import a particular network print server that you have in the environment, you could basically put in the IP address or the name, authenticate to it, and it would import all of the print drivers or all of the print queues that it had on that particular print server, and would make them available in here, and then you can assign them to users or to particular resources, so that if a user is coming in from a certain IP or coming in on a particular server, those particular printers would be made available to them. You'll notice here your bandwidth, you have the ability of limiting or controlling your bandwidth. Again, we've seen this before. You can do the limitation here by kilobits per second, etc., etc. So this is where you would limit bandwidth as opposed to doing it in policies in XenApp 6. Now, from a driver's perspective, this is a list of the drivers that are currently available on XenApp 5. In my case, if you were to install another driver, you would install the driver with Windows 2003 by basically going to settings and into printers here, and once you're in here you can come down into file, server properties, drivers, and you can add a particular driver if you needed to. Once you've added a driver, that driver would show up in the list, and in order for you to replicate, all it would take was just a right click down here, and you were able to do mapping. Again, driver mappings, if you wanted to do that, you can replicate the particular driver, and you say yes here, and you can select, give it some criteria on where you're replicating from to, etc., etc. But you had the option of doing the replication directly from the GUI. You had the option of doing the mapping as well, where you're mapping a particular driver to an older driver or a different type of driver. Remember, we did NCOM to an HP LaserJet 4100, so you can map drivers very easily in here. The other thing that you could do with printers was, from a compatibility standpoint, if you knew that there are certain drivers that were just not compatible, or you wanted the server to ignore them as soon as it detects them, you sort of put them on an ignore list where they're not allowed, etc., etc. You can always add those particular drivers in here, and you're able to configure what you're doing with those drivers that were a little problematic. The auto replication list that we talked about, again, with XenApp 6, it's now you have to add drivers to the auto replication list via PowerShell, whereas with earlier versions you can do it directly from the GUI. So again, depending on who you ask, some people like it, some people don't like it. Some things have changed, some things haven't, but overall XenApp 6 is a significant leap forward from the consolidation of the application standpoint, from the consolidation of resources, and just the approach to the enterprise farm that you have is significantly different with XenApp 6. But I just wanted to give you this quick walkthrough so that you know what you're dealing with, because I know there are a lot of XenApp 4 and 4.5 and 5.0 environments out there that you're probably going to come across during your day-to-day job, so I wanted to give you this quick walkthrough here. Alright, with that, let's switch back to our presentation and recap what we've learned. A pretty cool lesson, huh? It's a nice stroll down history or memory lane. It gives you, sort of an idea of where things were and how much they've progressed with XenApp 6. So what did we cover in this lesson? We talked about the delivery services console, and all the different settings and configuration that you used to be able to do, and how the farm settings used to be in there, the administrators node is in there, the applications node is in there, configuring server settings were in there. All of this stuff was moved into different places in XenApp 6. And then we talked about the advanced configuration console, and the fact that the advanced configuration console has had its name changed several times over the course of the life of MetaFrame and Presentation Server and XenApp, and used to be known as the Citrix Management Console, or the CMC. Today is known as the Advanced Configuration Console with XenApp 4.5 and 5.0, etc. And you can configure certain advanced things within the Advanced Configuration Console, such as the load evaluators, Citrix policies, printer management, and zones. We also discussed the ICA administration toolbar, which no longer exists with XenApp 6. This sort of used to be like an icon of the product, because this is the first thing that would show up as you're installing Presentation Server. It always came up on the right, and it basically gave you access, or quick access, to certain applications like the management consoles or any other tools that you had within the suite with the XenApp 4, 5, and 5.0. So finally, I hope this lesson was informative. I hope you found it valuable, and it was worth your while to take a stroll down memory lane and see how much things have progressed within the XenApp family. Finally, I'd like to thank you for viewing.